Hey everybody, what if building an app was as easy as just saying what you want? Today we're diving into vibe coding, a term coined by Andrej Karpathy to describe a new way of building software where you skip the syntax and you just talk to the AI. Is this the end of coding as we know it? Or is this just the beginning of a new kind of developer? If building software becomes a skill that anyone can access, how does that reshape who builds, what gets built, and why? This is the Daily AI Show. We're recording this live at 10 a.m. Eastern. And I am your host, Beth Lyons. With me today are Jyunmi Hatcher, Halliday, and Karl Yeh. Andy, can you give us a foundation for the discussion and then we'll launch into it?
Sure. Not so long ago, like back when AI kind of hit the streets in 2023, there were code completion assistants where you could take your written code, the code that you had developed, and put it into a window, and or have in some implementations you could have the AI look at the code while you're writing it and do what looked like autocomplete, right? Oh, he's typing this in. Let's finish that, row for him or her, and that was then superseded by more complete coding assistance that developers used. But vibe coding has packaged AI assistance with really comprehensive capabilities, writing code and understanding a full code base, understanding a product requirements document that you could feed it, and generating components of that code while you supervised it. And now we've gotten to the point where truly no code platforms are out there that use the large language models that are very capable of doing coding and will actually produce the UI, the actual presentation UI, not just show you the code, but actually show you that presentation like it will look on the web if you're doing a web application, or with a mobile simulator, basically show you what it'll look like on your mobile device. And you're basically talking to an AI assistant, just like you would be talking to ChatGPT, while in the right-hand window or left, if they switch the position of the chat window, the actual application is forming itself and showing itself to you. And you then just think about, okay, well, I what I really want is something a little different from that. Can you do that? And then the model changes the code and presents that user interface. So we're going to show you these things today. And before we do, I want to just start out by saying that most of these coding platforms, and I'm sharing a screen now that shows all of the major coding platforms that are out there that are like this, with the exception of Replit and Lovable.dev. Why? Because I knew before I asked the question here that both of those use Claude Sonnet 3.7 as their foundation model for doing the coding. So I wanted to know what all these others were using. And you can look down the list and you see that Cursor, which is one of the first and most notable ones that came out. It's distinct from the others in my view because it has a desktop application to capture what you're doing. But it's using Claude 3.7 Sonnet with a 200K token window as well. So most of these are using Claude right now. That's relevant because we just had Google drop Gemini 2.5, and that is reputed to be potentially superior. It does perform better on coding benchmarks than Claude 3.7 Sonnet, with the exception of one, the Swede thing. And we talked about this briefly yesterday in the news. But now I expect that most of these, which offer either they use just one, or they give you a drop down. You can say, oh, I want to use Claude, or I want to use one of the alternatives. Soon we'll see Google 2.5 being the brains behind these coding assistants. One exception in this list that you're looking at here is Bolt. Bolt.new is the URL for it. Bolt is very well regarded one. They don't disclose which model they use. They just say they use cutting edge AI models, probably not their own, and probably Claude 3.7 Sonnet, but they just don't choose to tell you what it is that's behind the scenes, and therefore don't give you a selection of which models those are. So, Karl, do you want to jump in there? And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. How do I do that on this thing? Okay, now I'm confused, Beth. What do I do to stop the share?
Oh, you're on mute, Beth.
I got it.
Oh, you're still on mute. Anyway, that's okay.
Okay, I ended the screen share. You have to click share again, which is not.
Okay, I'm not sure what's happening, but anyway.
Yeah.
I was not muted, but something interrupted. So let's go ahead, Karl.
Okay. I will have to say, a lot of people are excited vibe coding. It's, there's a lot of things that you could do, but I think you have to temper a little bit of expectations here. So I know how to code, I would say intermediate skill wise. And I think the most important part is I could recognize how certain things can be built, how they should be built on that intermediate level. The one thing that you have to manage your expectations on what potentially you could do, because there's a lot of, again, like AI, there's a lot of hype, and it makes it seem like the highest of the hype's like, oh, this guy made this thing for X millions of dollars. I'm like, okay, when someone says that, that's when it's like there's a lot of hype with it, because I spent the weekend now making this. I'm like, okay, you have to understand though, and you have to know what your objective is, right? Because you have to, just because you can do it doesn't mean you recognize what's being built, right? So
that's a great point.
In terms of back-end infrastructure, in terms of security, in terms of debugging, in terms of how things could be built. Like an analogy I would have is like, oh, because none of us here are surgeons, if you were to ask, hey, how do I perform this type of surgery? Like, oh, you do this, you do this, you do this. Like shoulder surgery. My brother just had it. So it's like, well, you make this incision this way. Let's say, I have no clue. You make the incision vertically, and then you do this with this tool. But a surgeon would know for this particular type of surgery, because my brother had microfractures in his arm, in his shoulder. You wouldn't actually do an incision. You could, but that would just take you 4 or 5 hours, maybe 7 hours longer, because you're going another way. In this case, you make a horizontal incision here to do this. But remember, if you cut this, you will actually sever this, which is very dangerous. And it's higher likelihood if you do that incision that way. But most shoulder surgeries start with that way incision. That's kind of how I see vibe coding. It's like when you look at some of the ways that the vibe code would start, or it's like, hey, I want to build this type of application that does this, even how specific your prompting is. Okay. But then when you look at how it's just simple, like, why would you do it that way? That doesn't make any sense. Or why would you go about adding this particular thing beforehand? Or, oh, shoot, I forgot to put a login. I'm going to do it after the fact, but you should have done it before or earlier, because now your code base is kind of messed and you have to go around. So those are the things. So if you don't know how to do it, it's having that particular understanding of how these things work that is kind of out of your tool belt, so you won't recognize some of the things that may happen. And actually, this is why I wanted to play a little video here, just to temper a little bit of the expectations. So now I'm going to share. It's actually a TikTok I saw this morning, so I thought it was perfect for it.
Good.
Okay.
Talking about coding, it's all about vibe now, man. Vibe coding is a term you may have seen on your LinkedIn timeline or heard in AI tech circles, but what does it really mean for engineers and what does it mean for your business? Vibe coding is basically using AI tools like Cursor or Cloud or ChatGPT to quickly iterate on your code base and launch a product. And with executives like the head of Anthropic saying AI will take over coding within the next year, I just wanted to take a minute to deflate the hype and talk what it's good for and what it definitely isn't. AI coding gives us an opportunity to iterate much faster and generate significantly more code. The vibe part comes from just working with the AI to figure out how to get your product out there. But with this new wave of vibing that we're all doing in the code base, there are a few points that are often overlooked when the story is told. Number one, for me, is that the better projects are often done by developers with significant experience and high levels of skill. There's still a human involved, and that person is of a higher level to understand the code that's being generated and look for issues when implementing the business case. The second major issue that continues to come up is when these MVP deployments actually find some market fit and start to scale, turns out they're kind of buggy and full of security holes. Common complaints of products built this way are back-end databases that are a complete mess, security issues with exposed API keys, incomplete or risky authentication paths, basically meaning unsafely stored user data, and the non-existence of monitoring and alerts to actually see what's happening inside of the product once it's up and running. The third issue that I see with vibe coding and just these tools in general is similar to what I see with text-based generation. You feel impressed as you see it spill out onto the screen. However, as you try to work, you realize a lot of it is not necessarily usable and may not play well with other parts of your product strategy. So my thoughts here are very similar to my thoughts on AI for content generation. Tools for your team to use, but in the end, you still need an architect or an engineer at the center managing how all of this comes together. It's a powerful tool, but not a strategy. However,
Okay.
I'd agree with most of those points. But I will say that I think he underestimates the facility that's available where you don't really have to have architectural skills. You can simply, if you're patient and you're willing to invest the time, you can just stay in the conversation, get into a back and forth with the coding assistant. And because it's presenting the UI, you're only thinking at the level of the UI. And you can get pretty far just assuming that you don't need to know what the back-end architecture looks like. You don't need to know what, trust the AI assistant, Claude, to do that correctly. And I'll give you an example of and I'm going to say, I haven't written a line of code in the project that I'm going to share with you in a few minutes, but I only bring to it the experience of building other products with engineering teams and being able to be in conversation with my CTO or with the senior software engineers and say, here's what I really want to have happen here. And then they go off and think about the best way to implement that. Now the assistant is doing that, and it will make mistakes. And you have to be patient, as I said, because correcting those mistakes can sometimes be infuriating because of the repetitive nature of that. And I'll show you an example of that. Karl?
Oh, so I think there, though, I would just being inside certain businesses and working with a business the past couple of years, I would be very, very, very hesitant to deploy any type of AI solution purely through vibe coding from anybody who has no experience in coding whatsoever. Even if I review said code, I'd be like, I don't know. And I just would feel very much more comfortable. I would even to take that to developers and be like, hey, I want you to overlook this and just to double check, just because of the security holes, just because it works doesn't mean can it scale to the level of how many hundreds of users can use it reliably without any security.
Those are important cautions. You can't get rid of what's called QA, right?
Yeah.
There are QA engineers. Now, I will say, as a counterpoint to what you're saying, I don't know that you absolutely need to have an engineer review the code that's been generated. It'd be nice if you had one, but if you do test and test and test the application from the user's position, setting aside scaling as an example, it's rare that a computer program will not be able to handle 10 times the number of users simultaneously as you could produce with a couple of people testing simultaneously. So, the scaling, I think, is a lesser issue, but you really want to make sure that every single workflow or action that you can take on every single page reliably results in click-through integrity, meaning if I click that button, what comes back is what I expected to see. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And then you've got to ask the coding assistant to fix that problem. And that's a large part of what vibe coding is identifying errors, or actually, as I'll show you in a moment here, having the UI report a build error or report an error in the UI. And you then just say, oh, damn it, I'm going to copy and paste that error and I'm going to give it to the assistant, and the assistant is going to fix it. Right. And you go through that cycle iteratively. That's the QA process. And eventually, I expect to be able to get this project that I'm working on completely ready for you all to use without ever having an engineer look at the code.
Okay. So, Jyunmi, I think your point is being made by Jeff in the chat. You can't yet get rid of QA. Do we need to bring into the conversation that this is the worst this will ever be?
Well, yes. I mean, I think anything AI is, you have to kind of look at it through that lens, right? And the more that we use it, the more we build upon specific AI use cases, the better they're going to be, right? So I think what this is a natural evolution of just making certain parts easier. So for clarification, vibe coding isn't no coding, right? You can get a lot further if you don't have any experience, because the assistants can fill in a lot of those initial steps. But even with what Andy was saying, where he hasn't written a single line of code, but Andy's worked on projects with engineers. So having that level of experience just to be able to communicate with those engineers and they go off and do the build, that is still experience. That's still a lens to be able to recognize the conversation and where you want to take the project. So I just wanted to take a quick second to clarify that, because that, I think, is getting mixed up in the hype and everything like that. Like Karl was saying, is because people are just saying, oh yeah, I just hopped into Lovable and I made my app in 15 minutes and now I'm selling it. It's like, hold on a second. And what we saw in that video did lay out some of the key components there. And I think both Karl and Andy are making great points in the software development cycle. But one of the things that we definitely need to highlight, and what's come to my feed recently, is the security issue. Because unless you're going through those software development steps, knowing what to ask of the agent to build these pieces, sometimes there's going to be gaping holes. And we're seeing now reports where people are saying, oh, hey, I showed my build process through my different steps, and now my product is acting weird. Bad actors from the outside, those kinds of things. And so this is all like, pen testing and those kinds of things. But that's a significant factor, part of the QA. Now, eventually, yes, more and more of the percentage can be done by these AI tools. And I do agree that the estimation of like 90 or 99% of coding will be done by AI for sure in those environments. Software development teams will use AI to get through their coding. I think that's the highlight message of vibe coding. It's natural language programming, right? It's a tool for programmers, engineers, or people who want to learn programming and engineering to use a much easier way of getting into it. I think also people who are project owners or program owners and you know program managers, they can get something out of it because they can go through that design process and work out what they want the user experience to be and all of those kinds of things. But you still need to you still need that QA component, and you still, you know, you need that product testing component, and you know, all those kinds of things. So I eventually see that these products, probably Lovable in particular, or Bolt or Replit, will have that as part of the sequence, right? The assistant may not actively, you know, do these QA checks, you know, now, but building it into, it's like, oh, are you ready to deploy? Have you done these checkboxes? No? Okay, let's check it for security. Let's do a pen test. Let's do, you know, let's verify these connections and, you know, those kinds of things. And so I think really what we're at a point here is it's really easy for people to get into the developed cycle, right? That's the really strength of this, the strong point of vibe coding is, okay, what do I need to know? What do I need to recognize? And then allow me, and with the assistant's help, to build the, you know, the software development or the project that I want to. The other thing that this allows, these tools really allow, is for people to just test their own things, right? Because we've been taking it from the point of deployment and selling it as a product, right? These are not the kinds of things that you really have to worry about if you just want to run a little thing to test something on your personal system, right?
Or not even
game with your kid.
Not even just test, right? Like, I just want functionality that doesn't exist, or I want functionality that doesn't exist without a $29 a month subscription. Can I make that function for myself, deploy it, and not need to share it with anybody, not worry about that? The other thing that I'm wondering, Karl, is it sounds a little like we are now in the position that we have been in with AI generating text, like when ChatGPT first came out. People are like, oh, it's amazing, it can do everything. And then, oh, it can do everything not particularly very well, because you needed to give it the context in which it was generating, right? So are we now needing to tell the vibe code environment that we're choosing which role they're playing? Or will things come out now that you can like bounce around between the agents? I have a coding agent, I have a senior coding agent, I have a QA something, because that, it sounds familiar to me. Does it to you?
Yeah, because I still think that you still need to know what kind of questions to ask. And even if you ask an AI, what questions should I ask? Like that kind of stuff. I still believe, like, back to my doctor analogy, back to like whatever the expert in the field will still do, in my opinion, especially in this, will 10x your vibe code. Just you put a vibe coder with a software engineer, an advanced software engineer, I would bet the advanced software engineer would beat the pants out of the vibe coder all the time, except for time, right? Because that person has to take time. Like, no, but if that person is using, let's say, Cursor and versus just the vibe coder who has absolutely no experience, that software engineer, just like any other field, will do a better job because they understand the whole thing, and AI empowers them to do whatever, right? So like our developers, when I ask, hey, I purely vibe coded this web type app that we are looking at for a client, and they're like, and I'm like, yes, I know these 5 items. When it was doing it, we would have never done, but I just let it go. And they're like, yeah, but now you made like another 2 days worth of work for us because we have to do. I was like, yeah, I know, I get that. But that's what I mean. It's like, but on that note, I will say, because we're at the, worst it's going to be, as more and more people are vibe coding and using the tools, I think it just will get better to understand how this stuff will work. And I really like the note by Stephen Heidel, I think that's pronouncing his name, from OpenAI, saying it's not as important to learn how to code as how to read code. Because if you can read code, then you can easily spot the things that you're trying to look for, then ask the right questions to make the adjustments, make the edits. Because if you can read it, and that's how a lot of the stuff that I've been like, this weekend I want to vibe code something, but I'm going to be looking out for certain things, and I find it's just faster to do it that way rather than, mind you, I'm kind of ADD on a lot of small things that it's like, nah, I'll do it myself because there's a certain way that I want to do it that the AI doesn't do it. So there's just some of that stuff as well. One thing though, I do want to, for those who do vibe code, there's one thing I want to share, and I think it's important if you do it that way. Yes, this is the one. Okay. This is from Cyber 3 Echoes, and it's really neat because he mentioned how if you don't know how to code at all, add this little line. Can you add explicit comments throughout the code to help me understand what it does and how to use these things like you were teaching a newbie? That's a really cool thing to do, because then even if you don't know, you're learning as it's code. Like, so it isn't just a bunch of code and you don't know what it does. You can actually
documentation for the win.
Yes, it's like, oh, that's what this does. That's what this does. It's like, then as you vibe code more, then you start understanding. So you're learning while you're doing. I think this is one of the best tips I've seen in terms of using vibe code.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Is it not time for me to kind of give those who you out there in the audience who are not just listening, but also have video, a view of what it looks like to be in one of these things?
Take us there. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So what I'm showing you here is lovable.dev. I started this project long ago, like at the beginning of the year, really, in Replit. And I ran into problems with Replit as the system got more complicated. And Replit just made errors on fundamental things like how to start the servers, the client server and the API server, and get them to talk to each other. And I wasted so much time, probably a week, trying to get that stable. I actually hired an engineer on Upwork to try to go in and fix it and just make it work so I could use the UI again. I spent a few $100s on that engineer. He made it look like it was working, but he had done a kludge that didn't understand the whole code base. And I had to abandon it. I came over here to Lovable. So this is lovable.dev. On the left is where I talk to the agent. And on the right is this UI. And I can switch between that and what the code base is. So here's the sandbox starting. And this is the console, which is showing what the startup process and the most recent actions were. And I look through these sometimes to look for errors, but I'm sorry, it's just too dense. And I love the idea that you just offered us, Karl. If I were to add explanatory comments in here, or the agent would do that for me, it would make a lot more sense, and I might spend more time in there. But here are all the files that are being used to generate this application. All of these have been developed by the coding agent. I didn't add anything into this panel manually. Notice up here at the top right, this is a Supabase powered application. Supabase powered in the sense that it has Supabase as its authentication method. So there's a certain level of password security for your user account that's automatically done by Supabase. There's also a connection to GitHub. And GitHub is where I can capture a snapshot of the current code base, and I could later take that GitHub repository and put it into one of the other coding agents. My long-term plan on this project is actually to take the final working version that I work with Lovable Dev to develop and put it into Cursor. Cursor has the ability to look at an entire code base. It's superior to most of the others because of that explicit ability, which is it tries to comprehend the overall interaction and working of the entire code base. So I want to do that as my first step in QA on this project before I release it. So let's go back to the UI and let me explain what this app does. So as I mentioned, it's using a Supabase connection to do this login, and there's a user account that is an admin account. I had to implement functionality that requires a special code for you to become an admin in this application. And we're looking now at the admin dashboard. There are two different main navigations here. One is the courses, and you see I have two courses. The first version of this course I started at the beginning of February, and this most recent one, which is the complete set of 49 lessons in this course on prompting AI assistants, that I just put up there on March 23rd, and I've been working on improvements to that. So those are the courses, and we're going to look at that course in just a moment, but you can see I have functionality here to download the source document from a source document for all of the parameters that drive this course from Supabase in the form of a CSV. And I can also then make changes to that CSV and update the course by uploading that amended CSV to the course, and that'll change things. But I'll show you in a moment that here within this admin dashboard, I can also make changes to all of the context data that's driving a specific lesson in order to refine that lesson and then regenerate and cache that lesson in the database for really rapid response when users are using it. This other navigation is prompt library. So inside this thing, in order to generate these, we're using GPT-4o and 4o mini. We have the system instructions. We have the merge lesson prompt, as it's called. This is the lesson prompt. And there's also a chat tutor in the system that I'll show you in a moment. And so I have to have a prompt for that chat tutor. Those are two different channels of communication with OpenAI so that the lesson can be there and you're talking to a tutor that can view the lesson and also respond to questions about that lesson and dive deeper if you want to. All right, so let's go back to courses and let's look at what that course looks like. Here's the navigation for prompting your AI assistants. Each one of these accordions has a drop-down that'll show the topics that are underneath that chapter and then the lessons within that chapter. So here we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lessons under the topic guiding conversations with LLMs. If I view a lesson, it'll bring up that lesson. And if I widen this view here, you'll see on the left, I have a tutor that you can ask questions to. And there's a little guidance here. You can paste any of the example prompts provided in the lesson into the chat window to see how the AI responds. So we're kind of giving users experience of how to do prompting of an AI assistant right in the context of the lesson. And so here's what the overall view of this is. Like, here's an example prompt. If I'm reading this lesson and I want to try it, I just copy and paste this over here. And I get an experience of what it's like to get a deeper understanding of that subject The tutor's thinking, takes a few seconds, and then it's going to pop back. Oh, it failed to send the request to the edge function. Okay, so there's a tutor chat error. Look at that. This is great. Perfect. So I could retry it, and but this error is something that I will now give to the agent over here and say, what happened here? I'm getting this error. Now we're vibe coding, guys. Okay. Correct this error in tutor chat. I'm just going to say, look at this. Okay, so now it'll take a second for the agent to come back. But while we're doing that, let's just kind of look at what the conversation looks like up here in prior things. Here's a build error on a refactor that I asked the AI to do on certain files. And I just give it the build error and it says, oh, I see this. A lot of these are TypeScript errors that it then goes and changes to fix that. It's thinking deeply and analyzing. You see this little blip down here on this most recent problem about the failed to send the request to the edge function. Here's an example earlier in the conversation. Something happened which broke the UI and there's an oscillating alert at the bottom that's looping and illegible and starts with admin check timed out. So it did a little review of the code, looks an issue with admin check timing out repeatedly, and it fixed that. And then I asked it to do something else. This is literally, weeks and weeks and weeks of conversations like this with this AI agent. And right now it says, I'll fix the error in the tutor chat component that's showing failed to send. The issue appears to be in the use tutorchat.ts hook, which is responsible for sending messages to the edge function. Let's update the implementation to better handle errors and ensure the request is properly sent. Okay, so now it's going to refresh this application, and you'll see this disappear. It'll come back, and we'll go and get that same lesson again. We'll put it. Oh, great. Okay, welcome to vibe coding. Okay, so it's messed me up here again. And so this is the kind of experience that I would have. I'm going to stop sharing now. This is the kind of experience I would have on a daily basis. I wish I could show you more about the application, but you can see that some of the changes that were done just in the last, it was working last night. Something's changed. I'm not sure what, but I'll have to go painstakingly through a correction of these errors, but I'll get back. That'll bring me back to where things were working again, and then I'll work forward on developing this application further.
Awesome.
Andy, it looks like Gareth has a viable determination of why the app broke. Apparently, you are a threat to Elon Musk, and he had it shut down remotely. So, yeah, Andy, I think you're just sharing too many secrets. You need to work in, keep it stealth mode for right now, and then we'll come out of stealth, and Sensei will take over the world.
Wow.
Yeah. Gareth was also saying maybe add a button to automatically copy and paste over when something's gonna do something.
Yeah, actually, Jude asked that same question. Do you really have to copy and paste, or can you just say fix the error? And yeah, Lovable actually provides a button that says, there was an error, fix the error, and you don't have to do it my way. But what I think about is one of the biggest problems that I've experienced with this is that you expect that the assistant is going to understand things that it's done before in the chat stream and keep context up to date with things that you've asked it to do before. And so by putting it in the chat, I feel like it's going to maintain, at least in that chat history, some recollection about having addressed that issue before. So build errors, which are TypeScript errors, probably not really that useful in terms of adding context for the agent. But maybe the fact that it's had to do build errors over and over and over again for me, based on simple TypeScript errors means that, maybe people who are working at lovable.dev can analyze these kinds of conversations and say, wow, our users are spending a lot of time trying to fix TypeScript errors, which, that shouldn't happen, right? Let me just.
I do look different. Sorry, I'm just realizing, yes, the role of Karl is being played by Beth. We'll fix that today.
Let me verbally describe one of the more persistent problems with vibe coding as I've experienced it. And it is that you can be working along and everything seems to be working fine. And you run into an error, like I just showed you, running into errors in the presentation of the UI that were the result of some change that the model made for a request that's seemingly unrelated, but it made some little change that just broke the UI, and now it won't even find the admin dashboard. What? I didn't want to make any changes to the navigation and redirect, for a logged in admin user arriving at the application. Why that changed, I have no idea. It's not explaining why it touched any element of that code, but this happens. This happens in these vibe coding platforms. And one of the things that's really frustrating is I'll be working along and then, something that worked before, and I'll give you the example of the CSV upload for a course, that's update course functionality. That used to work really flawlessly. I had no problem. I used it repeatedly. And then somehow when I made some other change that had to do with the admin's management of a course, then the CSV upload and the interaction with Supabase broke down, and I then spent 3 days trying to get it to fix this. And ultimately I said, okay, I've got to, as the chief executive of this development process, I said, I've got to do a workaround here and get out of this spaghetti tangle that we're in, because you just can't seem to fix it. And so I want you to shift back to a different model where you're going to just ignore any kind of processing of the upload of the CSV to figure out which fields have changed and all this other thing to make it sensitive to that. And I just want you to, if I upload a CSV to update a course, I want you to delete everything in Supabase and replace it with that. Just trust me to do that. And so it said, I understand. I see the requirement now. I'm going to do that. It fixed that. It seemed to be working. And then suddenly it was scrambling the same thing in the resulting download of the course that I just uploaded, which is the way I was doing QA on it. I upload the course, I download the CSV, and I match them in a comparative Google sheet. And sure enough, there were some differences. And I'm like, wait a second, if you're deleting the entire thing and you're replacing it, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there was some other things that I was keeping in here. And so I had to go through iterations of interaction with the agent to get it to do what I thought it had already done.
Right.
And so that wastes the developer's time. It's like, okay, if it were a junior developer working with me, I might forgive that kind of error the first time, but I would expect that human to remember the full context of our prior conversations. And these vibe coding systems don't do that. It's basically looking at the task anew each time.
So I've seen some conversation about moving systems, and like I understand that in that code and creating an app is much more complicated than text documents. But we all had the experience of trying to ask ChatGPT to fix something over and over and over again just in text, and it's still not getting it right, and being able to move to Claude and say, hey, will you fix this, and vice versa, right? So the fresh eyes of the different flavor of AI often was able to find the things because it was not experiencing the context in which it created the error, right? Or created the decision to write that particular way. I know your program is incredibly robust and therefore complicated. I'm wondering, is there that kind of thing for this? Like, can you pick your app up and move it to a different place and say, like, hey, I need to, this is what's happening, or not, this is what's happening. Hey, can you just take a look at this? We're having some problems. Tell me what you find.
Earlier on, when I first started, Replit wasn't using Claude 3.7 Sonnet. It was using something else, a mixture of experts kind of model, and it probably was using Claude 3.5 Sonnet, but wasn't showing that in the UI. And I would go over to Claude 3.5 Sonnet with the code, and I would, or errors, and I'd say, tell me more about this error and how to fix it. And now I don't do that anymore because it's using Claude 3.7, and most of them are. So it's like the final authority is already in there. But I do, as I mentioned earlier, I do want to be able to take the entire code base from Git, right? From GitHub. It's sitting there. Every time I click that button on the top right up there, it puts a new copy of the current status of the thing into GitHub. So that's my new repository of the code. I can give Cursor that full GitHub repository, and it will say, okay, I've analyzed this, I've evaluated it. I see that it could be made more efficient by doing X, Y, and Z. There's some errors I found in these things. Do you want me to go ahead and fix those? And then it'll build that. I'll put it back in Git. I could then reload from Git into Lovable with a revised version of the code base. So there is a facility to do that, to sort of go to a different consulting model. And I'm hopeful that that will actually be available very shortly with Google 2.5.
So speaking about that Git capability, Delma asked a question about versioning. Is that capability your versioning option?
That's right. If I wanted to go back to a prior GitHub repository, I can. But yeah, I haven't found that to be that necessary, Gwen. It's faster and easier to try to fix the current version than to kind of go back. In Replit, Replit has a tool inside the agent chat where you can revert to that place. It provides waypoints in the process, and if you get into a tangle with the code and it's not working, you can do a like restore back to this point, and that I've had troubles with that as well. I've had that fail. Like, no, wait a second, I restored to this point which I had clearly marked as a place where everything was working, and this isn't working now, even after restoring to that point. So it's just this is tedious work. This is not, oh, wow, I gave it a 2-sentence prompt and now I have an app and I'm making money. I agree with Karl's perspective on that. This doing an application still has all these steps in it, developing the requirements, providing those requirements to the architect. Architect has to, create a set of coding objectives that are then distributed to the various components, and now Claude 3.7 is doing most of that in the context of Lovable, but Lovable is it's a mixture of modules, if you will, that do various things with great expertise, but again may fail to have the full context of what else is in the code base.
So there's a couple things that I think oh, sorry, Beth, what I was going to talk about was, and if you have a comment first, I was going to talk about if you do want to start vibe coding, there's a couple things that maybe I want to show some resources, but if you wanted to quickly go through something.
I was actually just going to ask, so Prajwal Tomar, who is the author of the link thread that you, shared in Slack,
yep.
References the Moscow framework, right? Yes. Must have, should have, could have, won't have. And I'm wondering if that is part of this, that starting from a really, really MVP place and then adding on puts us in a different position than asking for everything.
Oh, when I was gone, did you show his thread?
No. Nope.
Oh, okay. That's what I was gonna quickly show here. Is just I thought that was very again, great way to start. There's another, if you watched Matt Wolf's video on vibe coding, how he vibe coded his website, he had a couple good points where he used ChatGPT. So essentially he inspected his website. I think he inspected or he even just took a picture. He took a picture. I think he went to Vercel VO. I mean, and you know, there's a very interesting workflow that he did, and he takes a lot of his. Andy, do you take your stuff to Cursor or just stay in Replit and Lovable?
I stay now until I get to the point where I want to have Cursor evaluate the overall code base. I'm still just working in Lovable.
Lovable. And I think that's one point it's an important point to have, is like, if you get some sort of working application, again, it's also based on expectations and what you plan to do with it. But I think if you get some sort of working functional piece from Lovable Bolt to Replit, I will highly suggest taking that, just like what Andy's going to do, take it, moving it to Cursor or Windsurf, because you can actually talk through, same thing, Sonnet 3.7. Some people prefer 3.5, and talk through the code, have it evaluate the entire code. If you actually use Cursor too, there is the context, so you can add. So what Matt actually did, what I thought was really neat, was he would talk through all the MVPs, like what he wants that functionality to do. He had ChatGPT 4.0 come up with that product spec. And then he would take that product spec and use it as context. So in Cursor, that context would always be there. So Cursor would know that's what the eventual end, what this thing is supposed to do, and then go back and forth in Cursor. So just a thought. But here's the community post from Prajwal. I thought it was an amazing thing to do. So like, you plan your code through you plan it through ChatGPT, right? You use voice mode to brainstorm it. Then you use a tool called Code Guide Dev. I haven't used this, but I think that's not a bad place to start. Maybe ChatGPT can give you everything, but they can generate the PRD and tech docs. Use the Moscow method, right? Put this all, have AI generate this thing, go to Lovable, put that piece in, and then, you know, sync it to GitHub, finish it in Cursor, and then gets a little bit more advanced to use MCP for migrations and schema updates. You probably will use Supabase anyway. That way your security is baked in, and then you can deploy on Vercel. It's a pretty good like overview of what you can do with vibe coding. So that's one piece. And another resource I'd like to, I think they just came up with it, Deep Learning AI. I think, yes. So they just came out with a new course. They had a vibe coding course. There it is, vibe coding with Replit. So they have a new course that I think they came out just a couple of days ago. So maybe start here as well. Watch the Matt Wolf video, watch this, and then start if that's where you want to start. I think those are pretty good resources to give you a good understanding if you don't have a programming background too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is super helpful. I know that Gareth was a QA, is somebody who understands code and is building. I was talking to another person in my improv life who is also a former dev and is like, maybe I can do some stuff. Let's talk about it. And the other thing that we've talked about is if you have a function that you're looking for that is just too complicated to get through a different system, it may be worth it to you to build your own app, your own scripts, your own environment in which that can happen. We did a show on MCP, I think last week. So if you're looking for more of a primer on that, go ahead and check that out. And I think we're ready to wrap. Everybody good with that? All right, I'm seeing nods. Thank you so much for joining us. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the new drops of ways of editing images. Gemini has a Flash image editor in its AI Studio. Grok can edit images. 4.0 just dropped. There's just a ton of that. We also have a sci-fi AI show tomorrow in the afternoon, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. That will be an interview of our very own Andy Halliday, who has just revealed this week all the different lives that he has led. So come join us for that. Bring your questions. And don't forget, we have a newsletter. You can find us at thedailyAIshow.com. And thank you so much.
Oh, one thing, the Matt Wolf video, it's not Matt Wolf. It is the Next Wave podcast. So they have Nathan, they have another one. So just look for that.
Good point. Thanks so much. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Aloha.